fact that someone earns more, gets more, is a violation of the egalitarian ideal of socialism. Tens of millions of Soviets deeply mistrust the market, fearing they will be cheated and outsmarted. They see the profit motive as immoral. The Supreme Soviets Anatoly Sobchak once remarked, "Our people cannot endure seeing someone else earn more than they do. They are so jealous of other people that they want others to be worse off if need be, to keep things equal." Sobchak said this attitude is one of the chief obstacles to economic reform. Well, the Russian television personality Dmitry Zakharov put it this way. He said, "In the West, if an American sees someone on TV with a shiny new car, he will think, oh, maybe I can get that someday for myself. But if a Russian sees that, he will think, this bastard with his car, I'd like to kill him for living better than I do." By the way, that's the worst word I'll be using tonight, so no need to be concerned, that's it. Well, that system is the polar opposite of the free market. And it encouraged greed in the ruling class, and envy, apathy, and alienation in everyone else. Hardly anyone defends that system any longer. But at the same time, we are urged not to let the socialist disaster sour us on the state itself, because we're told that the state is an indispensable instrument in the pursuit of social justice. But even this state that these critics have in mind, a non-communist state, a less predatory state, still carries its own moral and cultural perils, only a few of which we can cover here. Now, economists speak of what's called the disutility of labor, that human beings are not naturally inclined to go out and work hard. Albert J. Nock, a great 20th century writer, referred to the human inclination to seek after wealth with the least possible exertion. Franz Oppenheimer put it this way. He said, there are two ways you can acquire wealth in this world: the economic means and the political means. The economic means of acquiring wealth means that you engage in producing some good or service that your fellow man wants and voluntarily pays for. That's the economic means to acquiring wealth. The political means to acquiring wealth, in effect, is using the government to bash your neighbor over the head, take his money, and give it to you. There are no other ways of making money other than inheriting it, receiving it as a gift, and the like. Basically, you're either going to earn your money honestly, or you're going to secretly envy your neighbor, use the government to do your dirty work for you, and have the government loot your neighbor for your benefit. Well, the state, Oppenheimer said, the government, is the organization of the political means of wealth acquisition. That is to say, the state makes possible the political means. It makes it possible for you to live off your fellow man, because the state will simply loot him for you. If you're a farmer, it'll get you farm subsidies. If you're a big business, it'll get you protective tariffs. If you're this or that, there'll always be something for you. There'll be some way to loot your fellow man to benefit you. Because it's a lot easier to do that than it is to produce a good that people want and work at it and sell it. And remember, as Nock and others have said, people seek after wealth with the least possible exertion. Political means, lobbying government, it's a much easier way to acquire wealth than working hard and innovating and being creative and producing something people need. So the state, therefore, is a very appealing thing to the baser aspects of human nature. It's an irresistible attraction because it's easier to become dependent on welfare than to work. It is easier to accept farm subsidies and thereby to increase food prices for everybody else than it is to compete honorably and freely in the market. And it is easier to file an antitrust suit against a competitor than to outcompete him honestly in the marketplace. But the state makes these and other predatory options possible, and thereby fosters unattractive moral attributes and appeals to the worst aspects of human nature. In short order, society degenerates into a condition of low-intensity civil war, because once the farmers start looting everybody, and big business starts looting everybody, and the merchant class starts looting everybody, the rest of society decides it has to get in on the act too. We have to use government to loot everybody for our benefit so we don't lose out on net. The Hobbesian war of all against all now comes to characterize political life itself. All of this looting under cover of law is what Frederick Bastiat in the 19th century called legal plunder. Because, of course, it would be illegal for an individual to go up to somebody and say, I'm going to take your money and use it to subsidize my not producing any food. Because that's what the farm subsidies amount to. We pay farmers not to produce or to produce less. If you actually went up to your neighbor with a gun and said, give me some money and pay me for not producing, they'd throw you in jail. Or if you went up to somebody and said, I don't like your business, so I'm basically going to just shut you down for almost no reason, which is half of these antitrust suits are exactly like that. Well, again, you'd be thrown in jail. No one would allow you to do that. But when the government does it, well, that's okay. It's perfectly okay. That's the way government is. That's why Bastiat called it legal plunder. It's plunder, but the government allows it, so it's legal plunder. So the state is the political means of wealth acquisition. The market is the economic means. The market practically compels people to think about others, but not by means of intimidating them, threatening them, propagandizing them, or throwing them in concentration camps. It employs the perfectly normal, morally acceptable desire to improve your material condition and station in life, both of which can grow under capitalism only by directing your efforts to producing something that improves your fellow man's well-being. This is why Frederick Bastiat had a book called Economic Harmonies, and that is a beautiful encapsulation of the libertarian outlook on the world. Economic harmonies. That I do something that benefits mankind, you do something that benefits mankind, and we all prosper. Nobody's benefit has to come at the expense of somebody else. We can all prosper simultaneously. These are economic harmonies. John Rawls is a philosopher you may have read, and in his book, A Theory of Justice, he argued, among other things, that we could judge a society morally on the basis of how well off are the poorest. Well, the market wins according to this criterion as well. Study after study shows that all around the world, the poor are consistently better off in the most market-oriented societies and the most miserable in the societies with the most intervention into the economies. America's poor are better off than much of the European middle class today, and are better off than the American middle class of the 1950s. Now, this happy outcome, whereby we've seen that the market keeps human beings' predatory instincts limited because it channels people's desire for advancement into socially productive ends. You have to produce something for your fellow man. But also the market system produces vast amounts of wealth, greater than anyone has ever seen, greater than the world has ever seen, for reasons I'll get to in a minute, why that has to be the case. But the free market never gets credit for this. You go through school, I'm sure that some classes at Campbell are an exception, but typically what you hear is that government has been the savior of the working class throughout American history. If we didn't have government intervention on behalf of workers and against big business, most Americans would live in grinding poverty, working 100-hour weeks for 2 cents a day, and so on and on. I mean, we hear this all the time, right? Now, I don't blame people for believing this. I would be shocked if they believed otherwise. This is what you hear all the time, and in fact, it almost seems crazy and bizarre to think anything else, right? I mean, of course, we all know this, or we think we do. But I want to suggest that's not true. I want to suggest that the reason that Americans are as wealthy as they are, and the poorest are as wealthy as they are, has nothing to do with government transfer programs, or government intervention, or minimum wage laws, or any of the things that are typically cited, labor unions. It has nothing to do with that whatsoever. It has to do simply with this, and I apologize for repeating something I told the other folks today, but it basically goes like this. I want to give you this thought experiment, and then show you why it is that the market, you just let it run, and of its nature, it has to improve people's standard of living. And the thought experiment runs like this. Let's imagine you lived in a society in which there were no machines whatsoever, like there's no technology whatsoever. So there's no electricity, there's no internet, there's no computers, nothing. And there's no machinery that you can use in the production process to produce goods. No machinery, you've got to produce everything by hand. So instead of steam shovels, you have to be content with a regular shovel. Instead of a forklift, you have to be content with your bare hands. Instead of a computer and Microsoft Word, you have to hire a scribe to write you a letter, or write the letter yourself, or whatever. Imagine that kind of economy.